We all know what kind of reputation video game adaptations have, but video game adaptations have been on a generational run for the past few years. Except for these. And I've been thinking lately about what actually makes a good video game adaptation. Let me be clear, this is by no means a be-all end-all criteria to define what makes a good adaptation. It's simply an analysis from my perspective on what I feel like these adaptations did so well. So with that in mind, let's check out our first show. Edgerunners was a once-in-a-lifetime type of adaptation, which is why I want to cover it first, because I feel like it was so different in the circumstance that it was put in and the preconceived notion around the franchise. For anyone living under a rock during the pandemic, which I guess was sort of everyone, Cyberpunk was supposed to be the next big AAA game franchise. It was announced all the way back in 2012. Wait, 2012? Oh my gosh. And it was delayed like a bajillion times. And when it finally came out, it was the biggest disaster to hit mankind except like taxes. Even with its countless delays, Cyberpunk 2077 was a broken and unfinished game, and ultimately a failure. But out of the dust rose a team of animators on a warpath to regain the excitement that fans had lost for the franchise. With all expectations shattered, no one foresaw how good this show would inevitably become. This is how Cyberpunk Edgerunners was born. This show is everything the game wanted to be and even more, but specifically, what did it do correctly? By the way, if you haven't watched any of the shows I'm going to be talking about, what are you even doing? All the shows I'm going to mention are all great watches on their own, and if you haven't watched them, I highly recommend you do. Now back to the point. What did this show do so right? Well, for one, they didn't have background characters flying all over the place like in the game, so that's immediately a win in my book. But I think the main driving virtue in the show that all other good qualities sort of branch off from is the connection it draws to the games. And I bet you're like, yeah, duh, of course an adaptation has to feel connected to the source material somehow. But that's not exactly what I mean. Let me explain. This show takes place in the same universe as the games, and even in the same city, Night City, and you can really feel it. Almost every single main setting can be found in the game and explored. Not only that, but many of the weapons that the main characters use in the show, you can use in the game. And I don't just mean the guns they use, but the unique cybernetic upgrades in the game are shown on full display in the show. Lucy uses the monowire, Maine uses gorilla arms, and David uses the Sandevistan. While the projectile launcher and mantis blades can be seen used by multiple different people in the show. Once again, you may find yourself thinking, this is a pretty obvious point, because isn't a video game adaptation supposed to capture the same vibe of the games? And you'd be correct, but you'd also be surprised at how many fail at it. A perfect contrast to Edgerunners is the Halo show. I won't bore you with how this show failed in basically every way, but I will show you how it failed to make a meaningful connection to the games. Looking at it from the surface, the writers should have an easy pass on this category, right? You have the Master Chief at your disposal, the lead role of your games, and an already great and beloved character. All you need to do is not have him commit some drastically different action from what he would do in the video games, and you're good. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, at least it can't get any worse from here. Oh no! This is a great example of how you can have the same elements from your game you are trying to adapt, such as the enemies, weapons, and even your main character, and not capture the same vibe as the source material. In the games, Master Chief doesn't take off his helmet, and he doesn't have sex. And you know what? Even if he did have sex, he would probably still have his helmet on. But I digress. Through the creative choice to have Master Chief take off his helmet, a disconnect is created from the games and is almost insulting to the source material. Edgerunners had exclusively original characters, except for, and somehow created more of a connection to their games than the Halo show, who had the Master Chief. Now you can see why I wanted to add this point. And with the conclusion of the Cyberpunk portion, I can say with confidence one thing I find in every video game adaptation that I end up enjoying is a sense of connection to the game. The next show I chose to analyze was The Last of Us. The Last of Us game came out in 2013 and was an instant success, peaking at 37 million copies sold worldwide. Immediately you can see the difference between this show and Edgerunners. People already knew and loved this franchise, especially the first game, which the first season was adapting, so there were some stakes. The Last of Us show started airing in 2023 and was also an instant success. With the end of the first season, HBO clocked in 8.7 million viewers. People loved Bella Ramsey as Ellie, and Pedro Pascal's simp edits were skyrocketing.
I'm your daddy.
Now, this show does a plethora of things correctly, like the pacing, world building, and honestly just straight up the acting is top notch. But for me, I love the use of faithfulness in this show. Now, the wording there could be a little confusing because I'm not here to talk about how faithful it stays to the games, but more of how it uses unfaithfulness to tell a better, compelling story. Once again, spoiler warning for both The Last of Us show and game. Now let's compare two mostly identical scenes in both the game and the show.
I ain't buying it. Oh shit. Tess, run. Run!
Go! Go! Move!
Did you see that? It's not a huge difference, but in the show, one of our main characters, Joel, decides to take the rifle the guard is armed with, while in the game, he ignores it and continues on. Why? Because if you were to give one of your playable main characters an assault rifle right at the beginning of the game, it would be extremely overpowered and set off the balance of the game. But a show doesn't need to abide by these rules, so Joel decides to take it. This is what I meant by how the show uses unfaithfulness to tell a better story. Of course, in the grand scheme of storytelling, this one decision makes little difference, but it is a simple example of the writers of the show understanding what to adapt, what not to, and what to change. By the way, a video that helped me a ton in research for this video is the Closer Looks video on Disloyal Adaptations. It's a great video, and you should really watch it if you liked this video and vice versa. The link to that video will be in the description, and I'll bring up a couple of his points in this video. Let's take another example. Our main cast of characters are traveling through an infected city and are forced both in-game and in the show to travel through a museum. Our characters have the same motive in both versions, as in get through the city without dying, and essentially the only noticeable difference between both versions is, as mentioned before, Joel has an assault rifle in the show and a pistol in the game. So in theory, both scenes should essentially play out the same, right? Wrong. In the game, our characters take out about a dozen zombies before the chaos subsides, while in the show, our characters are met with only 2 zombies and struggle to even kill one. And once again, may I remind you, in the show, Joel, a proficient gunsman, is armed with an assault rifle. So why is the outcome so different despite having a very similar setup? It's because in a video game, a different type of engagement is demanded by the consumer compared to a show. There needs to be some sort of gameplay in a video game, and seeing as The Last of Us is a zombie video game at its core, the developers decide in this level to throw a significantly larger number of zombies at you, while in the show, zombies are hailed as a threat, that you should avoid them at all costs because if you get bit, you can't simply hit a restart button and play the whole scene over again. The point of this example is to show that most adaptations need to be fine with both staying faithful to the source material and also changing it. Movies, shows, games, and books are all capable of telling stories, but translating a perfect adaptation from any of them to another would result in a mess, and changing at least some elements are vitally important in telling a great story, and keeping some of those elements of the source material are vital to making a great adaptation. So wrapping up this section, the next criteria I'm adding to my list for a good adaptation is knowing when and how to be faithful to the source material. The next show I chose to analyze was Arcane. I know League of Legends, you know League of Legends, even if you don't know League of Legends, you've probably heard about it, and if by some miracle you haven't, I do have a video up on it. Arcane is a masterpiece in every right, and for the last time, if you haven't watched it, you absolutely should. If you only have the sort of time to watch one of these shows, which I completely understand, I would recommend to watch Arcane. I'm serious when I say that the only flaw in this show is canonically placing the Imagine Dragons in the League of Legends universe, which isn't necessarily a flaw, but it is pretty weird when you think about it. Alright, so what is Arcane's crowning jewel? Well, in my opinion, it's without a doubt the creativity. When I watched this show for the first time, I really appreciated the visuals and music and action. And not to say that I didn't enjoy all those things the second time watching it through, but watching it again really opened my eyes to how much sheer creativity went into creating Arcane. League of Legends has over 100 characters to choose from, with each having very distinct and niche personalities. And let me tell you what, the writers over at Riot Studios stay cooking all the time. Ornn, the fire below the mountain, Lysandra, the ice witch, Tarek, the hot guy, and a crap ton of other mythological beasts and borderline gods. But out of the near endless amount of stories they could have told using League lore, you know what they chose? A couple of girls with daddy issues. And it goes so hard, bro. You see, Arcane takes place before the events of League of Legends. At least, I think so. It's very complicated. And only focuses on two cities, Piltover and Zaun. And while Piltover and Zaun are very cool cities, there are still 11 other listed regions from the League of Legends lore we still have yet to see in Arcane. So the big question is, why did the writers decide to keep the story on such a small scale compared to the League lore? Well, I think we can speculate for a couple of reasons. For one, having a cast of primarily human characters helps the audience feel connected to them a lot more. I know for a fact some of you out there think you can emotionally relate better to Fiddlesticks the Ancient Fear, but I'm here to tell you, no, you should take a look at your life choices. Another reason is the scale for League of Legends lore is probably too big. With every character of League lore having an extensive backstory with intertwining characters, I could see how it would be difficult to try and cover the main story in its entirety. But now that we've covered potentially why the writers decided to take this route, let's talk about why it works. Jinx, Vi, Jace, Victor, and Caitlyn are what I consider to be the main cast. And once again, they are all playable characters in the game. But there are so many original characters in this show that help complement this cast, and sometimes just steal the whole scene. Mainly Silco and Vanderbilt, but there are quite a few other very well written Arcane exclusive characters. Another reason why Arcane just works is how it interacts with the League lore, and I love talking about this one. Now listen, I am not a League lore enthusiast, but I do know some of the basics. In the bio we get for Jinx, we know that she's basically crazy, but it never mentions how she got that way. And again, it mentions an obsession with Vi, but leaves the reasoning ambiguous. It would have been a safe and easy option for the writers to show current day conflicts between Jinx and Vi and get bits of backstory through confrontation, but instead we get the bold decision to completely flesh out both of their backstories and actually make Jinx and Vi sisters, which connects and explains why Jinx targets Vi in the lore. Jace and Victor's stories are also great examples of what I'm talking about. We get a similar case to Jinx and Vi with Jace and Victor's respective bios explaining how they are essentially friends turned mortal enemies. But Arcane expands on this element by making Victor disabled, which helps us better understand his constant need to try and improve the natural flaws of the human race. With Jace, Arcane explains why he is viewed as arrogant and rude because his Hextech inventions are created with a long thought of dangerous and extinct magic that many don't understand except his former colleague Victor. Overall, what I think I'm trying to say here is, in a world of star-forging dragons and immortal celestial beings, to make a ragtag group of characters from arguably the worst setting in League work so well is very cool and requires a lot of creative thinking. Now that we're nearing the end of the video, I know some people are gonna say, but Ghost, how can this criteria apply when Edgerunners is an original story, The Last of Us is a current adaptation of the first game, And Arcane is a prequel. The adaptations are all over the place in relativity to their games. And I would respond with, this list can be applied without a doubt to all the other shows I've mentioned. For example, Edgerunners not only has a strong connection to its games, but also uses unfaithfulness in the sense that David's cybernetic upgrades, the Sandevistan, can be used an infinite number of times in the games, but in the show, David has a limited number of times he can use it per day because there has to be some sort of risk to this all-powerful weapon. Or how Arcane draws a meaningful connection to the games by having your main cast as playable characters. Or how The Last of Us uses creativity by altering situations from the game to the show, but largely having the same ending. Honestly, thank you for watching the whole video if you're still here. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, my 50 hours in League I think is one of my best videos. And I think you should check it out if you liked this one. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one.